Okay, I'm back, everybody. I do look better and feel better since I had my shower. This is my second vlog. Um, I do say a lot. I'm sorry for that. It's my brain trying to think of my what I want to say next. The it's just the way it is. Uh, I want to tell you first that um, I have moved so many times in my life. It's unbelievable. You may know somebody that's moved more than I have, but then again, you may not. And I don't count the times when I was a child. I count the times since I was married. I was married for 37 years. And my ex-husband and I moved 76 times in our marriage, give and take maybe a couple that I forgot about. After I divorced him, or he actually did the paperwork and filed for the divorce, but when it was over with, I sat here one day and I thought back over the years and I wrote down every time we made a move. And I was shocked. Um, I am not lying. I have it documented. I will show you my list at another time. But today I want to go back to my childhood. And I want to talk to you about how my life started, um, how things in my childhood affected me long term. So I was born in 1959 in Louisiana. And my parents were very young. My mother was 15. She had me when she was 16. And she was a child herself. But we didn't live in Louisiana very long. My brother and sister was born in California. My family, my biological father's family, lived in California, and some of them lived in Louisiana. So we were Louisiana and California. I remember some things that happened when I was very young. And one of the things I remember um, was between the age of 2 and 3. I remember being thrown around like a rag doll. And I had this image in my head, a feeling, a flashback, I guess you could say. And I asked my mom one time, I said, I have a thing that keeps coming to my mind of a child being tugged and pulled and just like a rag doll. And she told me that they were fighting over me. She wanted to leave him. They got into this huge fight, and he would snatch me out of her arms, and she would snatch me out of his arms. So, that was traumatic for a small child to be tossed around like that. And so that's the earliest thing I remember. It wasn't real traumatizing to me, but it was something that was coming to my mind. Uh, I remember having a nightmare one time. I was probably 3, 4, and I was dreaming that there were monsters under my bed. And I remember my dad coming in and consoling me, telling me it was just a dream and that everything was going to be okay. And that's, was in my mind, has always been in my mind, the loving, comforting of my dad. So, the other thing that I recall was after my sister, she come next, and then my brother. I don't remember a whole lot other than seeing some photos of us, when we were little. But the biggest thing that stands out in my mind was we were taking a trip, and it was a long trip. I remember being in the back seat with my sister and my baby brother. He was in a little bassinet like thing. We didn't have to have seat belts or car seats or anything like that. Um, I remember being back there and my mom and dad fighting, screaming, fussing, carrying on, hitting the dashboard, just real traumatic, scary. There was times I thought we're going to die. We're going to have a wreck and we're going to die. Well, on this trip, um, we stopped somewhere. My mother went inside. We stayed in the car. I don't remember if my dad went in or not. I don't think he did. And I got something in my tooth, excuse me. We went, she went inside and come out, and she had this picture, and everybody has seen it, I'm sure. It's a picture of an angel um, walking along with these two little girls in front of her. It might be a boy and a girl on a bridge that was broken. The bridge had slats missing, and the angel is standing behind them, kind of guiding them. And I looked at that picture. It was placed on my side of the seat, in front of me behind the passenger seat. And it seemed like it was fairly big. I don't really remember, but I remember just looking at it, staring at it, trying to figure out what it meant. And I didn't know anything about angels or God or, anything religious at that early of an age. But I do remember looking at that and trying to figure out what it meant, what it was about. I don't know why she got that. So we go along on the trip. I remember seeing a lot of water, and later on, she told me that we were on the coast, going through from California all the way to Alabama. And so I'm sure I slept a lot because there's a lot I don't remember. But the main thing was the picture and then them fighting. So when we got to Alabama, went to my grandparents' home, and we got there, and she and my dad left. I was with them. I think all three of us kids were with them. And she took him somewhere and left him. I didn't know until years later that it was the bus stop. And she made him go back to California. And I remember being very sad and not understanding, where my dad was going. So that stayed with me for a long time. It never was explained to me. I figured it out on my own. Being 4 and 5 years old, uh, your mind, your imagination, goes crazy, and I didn't know where he had gone. So we were living with my grandparents, and something happened to me there that I didn't understand. It happened, and I had blocked it out, and it did. I was 50. I was 40. I think 47 years old before I started having flashbacks and realizing, these things were coming to my head. And anyway, what happened was um, my grandfather molested me. And right after that, I went into the hospital. I was in there for 14 days. And the way I found out that this happened was I was having flashbacks when I was 47. And I asked my mother, did these certain things. She confirmed certain things for me. And it was things that I remembered as a child during that time. And she confirmed several things for me. So it was validation that it happened. So I called the hospital 10 years ago. I called the hospital that was in this town, and they told me that the hospital that I would have had to be in was no longer there. And I asked the lady about the records. She told me that if they had any, it would be in boxes in the basement. So I told her what year it would have had to be, and I told her my birth name and my mother's name and my father's name. So she told me she would do everything she could to see if she could locate the records. And because I explained to her what I thought had happened. So a few days went by and I got her phone call. She told me that she found something. It was only a admission and discharge card. And it was, she said that I had been in the hospital for 14 days. So I just, I kept thinking, well, what could I have been in the hospital for so long? So anyway, she mailed me the card, and I kept it for a long, long time. And right now I don't recall where it's at because I've moved so much. Anyway, I realized that whatever happened between my grandfather and I, it happened. So going back to that time, I remember him wearing boxer shorts. I remember me sitting in his lap and feeling him. I could feel him under me, I'm on his lap. And then I remember the way the bedroom looked. I remember it was a small trailer. It had 2 bedrooms. And it had these little petals, these little flowered petals. You may have seen them before if you know anything about older trailers. They were on the ceiling. And I remember seeing those. I remember the way the door slid out of the wall to shut. And I remember the way the dresser was built into the wall. Uh, I remember the way the window was at the end of the trailer. It was had a lot of windows and they were open. And I remember laying in the bed and I was crying and looking out the window at the curtains blowing. And either I passed out or my psychiatrist told me I could have willed myself away from that situation. So I don't remember anything after that. But those things in my mind are so vivid. So soon after that, well, one of the reasons I remember going to the doctor was because I had gone to the bathroom in my grandparents' home, and I had some blood stains. And my mother took me to the hospital. And I remember being in there by myself. There was another child in the room with me, but my mother never stayed with me. Um, she never stayed with me in the hospital. So one day while I was in there, she showed up with two men and she told me that one of them, she introduced me to him and said, "This is going to be your new daddy." Well, I was so confused. I'm like, my new daddy? You know, I didn't understand, what was happening. So they left. And I remember looking out the window and I could see them in the parking lot. And I'm just crying. I'm just sobbing. And here I am only 4 years old, maybe 5. And I'm getting a new daddy. So the nurse came in and brought me some chocolate milk. And she tried to console me. And so I had chocolate milk and she talked to me for a little bit. So anyway, um, she, I don't remember getting out of the hospital. I just remember things happening and changing a lot. My grandmother and grandfather divorced. We were staying at my aunt's house, and my mother and this man um, were getting married, and we were not going to the wedding. We had a babysitter, and I remember sitting there watching TV, feeling very sad that we were not getting to go because everybody was all dressed up and, happy and laughing. And, me and my brother and my sister were sitting there with a babysitter. And I remember feeling hurt because I felt like we were being, I knew we weren't being treated fairly, even as young as I was. I wanted to go, and for a long time I resented it. So before they got married, though, this is a really funny story. My brother had this little thing on his ear. It looked like a little growth or something. She took him to the doctor, and they were going to remove it. She left my sister and I in the car. She was in my new dad's car. It was almost like a sports car that he was all into racing and stuff, and he had this nice Chevy car. And so my sister and I are sitting in the car, and we waited and we waited and we got scared. So we got out of the car and went into the doctor's office. And we went in a side door and we opened the door and there was somebody laying on the table and they were doing surgery on him. So we got, whisked away into the waiting area, and my mother seen us, and she took us to the car screaming and yelling at us. She left with us, and we went to a park, and she beat the crap out of us. And we were in the back seat, and she was turning around yelling at us, and she hit a tree. And I kind of snickered, thinking, that's what you deserve, you know. And so, anyway, she was really scared to tell her new soon to be husband that she hit a tree and messed the front of his car up. So that was a funny thing that happened. To me, it was funny because I felt like it was she got what she deserved because she shouldn't have treated us that way. We were young, we were scared. And so we went on and they got married. And we lived in a house there in that small town, and I started to school for, kindergarten. Or I don't think we had kindergarten back then. I was in first grade, and I was 6 by then, 5 or 6, and I went to first grade. And the house we lived in was really close to the school, so I walked to school by myself um, for a few blocks. It was a small town. Back then, you didn't have it to worry about your children, but it was a little bit scary for me because I was very young. And I walked to another girl's house about halfway, and she walked the rest of the way with me. And I felt so grown up and, independent, and I really liked it. So I didn't do well first grade. I wanted to talk a lot, and um, I wanted attention. And so I stayed in trouble a lot. I remember getting my hands paddled. They take your hand and they hold it back like that, and they paddle your hand. I remember getting that done quite often. And I remember sitting in the hallway. One day my mother came to the school to check me out, and I'm sitting in the hallway being punished, and I got a really bad whipping when I went home. So I had to repeat the first grade because I was just not learning. I didn't want to learn. I was more interested in making friends and talking and being disobedient. So anyway, that's the way my childhood was. Um, my dad, my biological dad, we didn't get to see him. Uh, we didn't get to see our grandparents. And they were so sweet to us. They were wonderful people. They when they would try to talk to us or call us, they just cried and cried. They wanted to see us so bad. And so I know how they felt. Now I know how they felt. So anyway, it reflected on me being sad a lot and depressed at such a young age. So I know that, well, when I was in maybe second grade, I started having sores in my mouth very bad. And they were, these really big white canker sores. and I was told they were called ulcers. Instead of having them in my stomach, I had them in my mouth. And I wouldn't have just one. I would have 5, 6, on my tongue, in my throat. And it was merely from stress. My mother would whip us very, very hard. And sometimes even she would hit us with her fist. She would beat us with a belt, a switch, for nothing. We were kids. We did things. We were rambunctious. We got whippings for everything. Some we deserved. Um, I was very disobedient one time when I was in, I want to say, second grade. Um, my class was going to the movies, and we had already, my movie fee had already been paid, and I got in trouble. And she says, "You're not going to get to go." So um, I went anyway with my class. And the whole time I'm in the movie theater, I'm thinking, oh my goodness, I'm going to get in so much trouble. My stomach turned and churned and hurt the whole time I was in there. And when I got out of the movies, and by the way, it was Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs back then. So when I got out of the movies, I looked across, the road, and I see my mother's car, and I wanted to run and hide. But I went home and I got the worst beating of my life. So anyway, I think I should stop now because I'm not sure how long I can do this second vlog. It says 27 minutes already. So I'm going to stop and continue on my third vlog, VLOG, video blog. So I will see you in a little bit.